Hello and welcome back to the World Leader Leaderboard, the podcast where we rank politicians to tell you who's winning and who's losing each week. I'm joined by Ben Blissett.
Hello.
And Georgina Findlay.
Hello.
How are you both doing?
Really well, thank you.
So good.
It's going to be a big day, isn't it, Jack?
It is going to be a big day.
Massive.
Today, we're expecting to hit 1 million subscribers on the TLDR EU channel. And we kind of were hoping it might happen during this podcast record, but I think it's going to happen a bit later, like within an hour of the record. But we're 202 subscribers away, so we will see. If I'm looking at my phone in this video, it's because I'm keeping an eye on that.
It's been a long time coming. It's the first channel to hit 1 million. And
it will be the first.
It's a big deal.
It's huge. It really is huge.
Second to hit 100,000, first to 1 million. It's a real trailblazer, the EU channel.
I think it's the biggest milestone a channel can hit. Because 10 million is still obviously impressive.
At that point,
beyond that, but you've got,
Also,
and 100,000 is good, but the million, that is the biggest milestone you can hit.
And it's gold.
Gold.
It'll be on the wall, it'll be in the wall in the studio for main videos when we get it. So, also, if you're watching the video, there's stuff around us now. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Looks delightful.
Anyway, let's not bore the people listening too much because they can't see it. But imagine we're sat somewhere nice. And let's get into our winners of the week. Georgina, let's start with you. Who is your winner of the week?
My winner of the week, as a representative of Europe as a whole, is Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President. This is because I think Europe is well prepared for the impact of Trump's tariffs when they come. There are various strategies and tools that the EU has at its disposal to get through okay. Mm-hmm. And I think whatever short-term pain Europe will endure because of the 20% tariff that Trump has imposed on EU goods, now suspended for 90 days, in the long term, this will be good for Europe's strategic autonomy. And I think we're already seeing that as the dollar slips, the euro has been surging. So it's hit a 6-month high against the dollar. Investors leaving the US will be looking towards safe and stable European assets and European companies and countries and currencies to move their money towards. And this is already starting to happen. Also, I think something that people are talking about Europe potentially being able to do is implement a tax on the big US tech companies, which would not only be a good way of kind of retaliating against Trump's tariffs, but also I think quite a politically popular move, and also tying in with general rising fears about what young people's addiction to tech, or what all of our addiction to tech and the big US tech firms is doing to us. And basically, I think there's a few reasons to be optimistic about the EU in the next few years. And that's my pitch.
So obviously, as you say, Trump's tariffs is what's behind a lot of this. That's why we've seen the surges in Europe. That's why we've seen more pulling together of Europe than ever before. But this obviously was a trend we were seeing a little bit before that, right? Kind of before the tariffs, but kind of post-Trump's actions towards Ukraine and various other issues, Europe started pulling together even before the tariffs. And now the tariffs have been rolled back a bit and they're being delayed and whatever else. But do you think this is like part of a broader trend that Europe was already kind of coalescing around various issues and this is only going to speed it up?
I think so a bit. I think there's also been, I would say Trump coming in the White House, his return has been a massive cold shower for a lot of European politicians who've now been shocked into, okay, we've got to set aside whatever political differences or national differences we have. But it's interesting. I don't know how this will pan out in terms of the trend we saw before Trump came back was the rise of anti-establishment, far-right, very anti-EU, pro-isolationist parties across various European countries, which all performed well at the European elections in June. And I'll be interested to see whether those trends continue domestically, even whilst people, and I'm sure some of those voters as well, understand that Europe has to be united to get through the next few years with Trump in the White House. I don't know how that will play into things, because whether, like we've already seen, so last week, the new German coalition, which is the centre-right CDU/CSU and the centre-left SPD party, published their new coalition agreement, which interestingly went down a bit lukewarm in Germany, with especially the far-right AfD topping the polls for the first time on the date of the publication of the coalition deal. And so even within Germany, clearly people are not quite on board with what the coalition is trying to do. But internationally, it was very well received. The Economist called it blandly reassuring.
Classic Germany.
The Le Monde newspaper in France also said that it was, they said it was cleverly composed or something, and it was, a great kind of stable centrist program that was going to be good for the rest of Europe. And I think I think I agree.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting whether voters will see that as well, or whether Germany and the rest of Europe, even if they do all come together with a quite strong, pro-European program, whether voters will see that too, or whether, the rise of anti-establishment politics will just continue. But I think what will also help is that some of the chaos we were seeing, basically because of the rise of those far-right parties, has quietened down a bit now. And we're not seeing as many crises. The fact that Le Pen has been barred from running in the next presidential election will make a big difference to what's going on in France. Also, now that the traffic light coalition in Germany, which was plagued by infighting, has been switched out for something that will hopefully be a bit more stable and unified, it does mean that even on a country-specific level, if there's less chaos, then there'll be less chaos overall, hopefully.
And there's enough chaos globally in the White House that people, as you say, start to think, okay, maybe Europe is more of something I want to support.
Let's bring back boring.
Yeah, maybe we should bring back boring. I'd say this podcast generally does a pretty good job of that. I got to say, Zac isn't here. This is the first episode he's not been on.
Yeah.
But I want to say on his behalf, surely this is a vindication for his man, Emmanuel Macron, as well, right? He's been pushing for this kind of European integration for ages.
I've got everything Zac would say in my head right now. But
go on, give us 10 seconds of what Zac would say. You can do an impression too.
I was about to say I could do a Zac impression. No, I can't. Not live on the podcast. When we hit 1 million.
Okay,
no,
if it happens on the show.
No, I don't want to promise anything on podcasts because we've got a bad reputation for doing that. I'm making no promises, okay? However,
what would he say?
He would say, no, I can't. I will end up doing a Zac impression, which I don't want to do. But yeah, you're right. Zac would say this is what Macron's been saying for years.
Doesn't sound like Zac at all.
No, he would also say, I think that Merz is going to be really good for Germany in the next few years. He would also say that European manufacturing is going to do well in the next few years. That Europe will realize it doesn't need the US, even though for decades it has been. And those are all the things that I can imagine Zac saying.
Sounds like Zac.
Yeah.
Ben, you got anything you want to say?
Not really. I mean, my main thing was just to stress, a lot of the people that I'm bringing up today as well are downstream effects of people that are sort of doing well on the back of Trump's chaos. And the sort of reassuringly boring people are polling very well as a result of that's what people want at the minute. They want a calming force in their politics. And for exactly as you were saying, for years everyone sort of assumed that politics is moving to the sort of populist right. But Trump's actions in the White House has almost halted that trend, or starting to halt that trend in a lot of different territories. And it isn't just the EU. I mean, we'll get on to a few other places later. But yeah, I completely agree.
It's interesting how it's swung that this whole year it's been movements on the board based on Trump, how different world leaders have reacted to Trump, what Trump has meant for different countries, whether that's tariffs, Ukraine, whatever. And it still is, but kind of in the opposite way to a lot of the time. Like at the beginning, it was like the people who are allied with Trump, they look strong, Musk looks great, all those kinds of things. And now it's a bit like, as you say, the kind of people who stand up in opposition to him, be that in Europe or wherever else in the world, are beginning to look a little stronger. But
it's almost, in a way, you kind of need the chaos to make the stable look good.
That's
because
true.
if you've got boring and boring,
yes, exactly,
like boring Biden and boring Europe, everyone just looks boring and no one likes that, and boring equals bad. But if you've got chaos and boring looks good.
Sure.
So it's interesting to see how the different dynamics playing out globally.
As the year goes on, we'll see if boring or chaos wins.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the new left-right axis.
Oh, boring chaos.
Boring. It is though, in a way. It's like, the kind of whole political compass is reorientating. It's no longer just straight left-right. It's like liberal democracy versus populism.
Ben, is your person this week? Are they boring or chaos?
Well, I think a lot of people would argue that they are very boring. I
think it's hard to argue they're chaos.
They're definitely not chaos. It's Keir Starmer. So the reassuringly boring leader of the UK. On Saturday, he basically rushed through some emergency legislation. So this was after a week of discussion and conversation with the owners of British Steel. Now, the reason this is so good for Starmer, there's about three or four different reasons why this is so good. Firstly, steel is just very important to countries. I mean, all of the G7, the members of the G7 produce their own steel. It's really important for, obviously, domestic manufacturing. It's really important for defense and security. You know, as we've seen in the last couple of years, supply chains are very important. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Europe was thrust into a energy crisis and had to reassess how they acquired their energy. It's, you know, you can see a similar thing potentially happening with steel, especially if we don't produce it ourselves. The issue is that it just wasn't a very profitable business. Apparently, each day this year, so the owners are a Chinese firm called Jingye, and they acquired British Steel in 2019. The issue is that they were losing this year around £700,000 a day, every day it operated. And in the last week, there were discussions about them closing their Scunthorpe plant, which would cost about 2,600 jobs, would be a massive hit to British domestic steel manufacturing. Obviously, that has really big implications, as I've already said, for security. So Starmer rushed through some legislation on Saturday, which meant that the government could tell Jingye what they can and can't do, so that they have to keep the plant running, they have to keep doing things. And the phrase they've used is it opens the door to nationalisation. It will give the government the power to nationalise it.
And the Chinese company will say...
well, this is the thing, is that at the minute it isn't nationalised, and they're keen to not say that they definitely will, but it's certainly looking like they're going to in the future. And I think this is a really big win for Starmer on about three different axes. Firstly, it's just popular domestically. I think there's the legislation actually went through without a vote. There were no MPs, because the way that Parliament works is you can sort of you don't have to physically walk through the yes/no lobbies if it's clear that a bill will go through. So there were no MPs opposing it. Even like Reform UK were pushing for nationalisation. So it cuts across the political divide. It's really good on an economic point because you're saving jobs. Who's against that? And that's good for growth, things like that. And it's good for security and defence. So it's like a win on so many different axes. Plus the fact that he rushed it through on a Saturday, just the optics of that, looking like you're a government that is really trying to do the correct thing, and we're willing to sort of break conventional norms to get it done. I think Starmer has sometimes struggled for a direction, and he's sometimes struggled to show the public the things that he's doing. He's doing a lot behind the scenes, but these big flashy moments don't really happen for him. I think this really was one. I think this is a really sort of good demonstration of Starmer's sort of quiet power, I suppose. I think it was a really positive move. It's been really well received, and I think he's going to do really well from it.
Can I ask, as someone who didn't know the background, did this, because it seemed to me when the headline came through on Friday, I think, saying that Starmer was, what's the term for the emergency? Recalling Parliament on Saturday for the emergency vote to save British Steel. And I was like, oh, this is the first I've heard of it. What was like, did he just kind of swoop in?
So kind of. There were discussions last week with Jingye between the government and the Chinese firm that owns British Steel. And basically they were looking at doing a bailout. So just providing Jingye with the money to keep the plant open. Yeah. The issue was that Jingye wouldn't agree to the terms the government wanted. So one of the things the government wanted were confirmations that there wouldn't be huge job losses. So Jingye were basically saying, no, we'll take the money, but we're not confirmed we're gonna keep the staff on. Yeah. Because a lot of the machinery and the tools needed are about at the end of their lifespan. So they need to use the money they need to use the money to buy that. Plus there's all of the the iron ore, things like that they need to purchase. So they were not confirming. So the government basically got to the point where the negotiations had broken down, and it looked like if they didn't intervene very quickly, they were just going to close the plant. So that it was very much a last minute thing. And there had been background talks for the last few weeks with Jingye between them and the government. So it really was like a last minute thing, but there was a bit of background to it.
Interesting. As you say, it seems to be a fairly unique win for Starmer. It's been a while since he's not actually doing that badly on the board, but it does feel like he's. Well, I think the fact he's. Wait, where did Reeves go?
Reeves has been culled.
No, she wasn't.
Yeah, she was.
No, she wasn't.
She was.
We got rid of her last week.
Oh,
She's gone.
okay.
You look really sad.
But I think just to add on to this as well, Starmer has had some wins in the last few months, but it's always on the international scene.
That's true.
And he's really struggled for domestic wins. And I think this is such a good example of a domestic win. I think the Conservatives tried to push back and say, look, it's a demonstration that they've failed since they that they won the election last year, that things have deteriorated so much that they've had to recall Parliament on a Saturday. But I just don't think that's cut through at all. And the fact that they ultimately voted with the government anyway, it just dampens that quite significantly.
I think the argument that politicians have to come in on the weekend and that's a bad thing doesn't necessarily resonate with the British people. I think we're not overly worried about what they were planning on doing with their Saturdays.
No, it's so true.
And they got to go to the boat race on Sunday, I'm sure.
I'm sure they
so
did.
many politicians
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
Anyway, a rare win for Starmer. Good for him, I guess. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. If it does end up getting nationalised, what thoughts are around that. Obviously, as you say, economic advantages, security advantages, but also 700 grand a day. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
And that's going to be our money soon.
Yeah.
Xingye going to get off the hook. It's time to invest big in Xingye, I reckon.
Yeah, I reckon
That's
so.
not
Investment
stock
advice from Jack
not
on the
stock
podcast.
advice. Past performance isn't indicative of future results. Don't invest
Take
money you
no-
can't afford to lose.
It's all at your own personal risk.
Okay, let's speaking of financial advice, this week we are publishing Too Long. We've obviously talked about this lots, but this week we are publishing the latest issue. It was meant to arrive last week, but for various reasons it didn't. Not our fault. Should we throw him under the bus? Should we name him Shane? No,
It's Xingye.
It's Xingye. But anyway, it's arriving this week, which means it's being shipped this week, which basically means by the time you watch this video, if you order it, you are no longer pre-ordering. You are just buying a copy and we'll get it to you. I mean, it's a bank holiday, so we'll get it to you as fast as we can. But the TLDR is the latest issue is published. It's out. And to celebrate hitting 1 million subscribers, we're offering a special discount. Also, by the way, we are currently on 999,835. It is getting pretty close.
It is getting close.
To celebrate 1 million subscribers, we have reopened the vault. TLDR has a vault. We had to pop down to Hatton Garden. We opened it up.
Yeah.
And we found in there, we didn't know we had them. We're as shocked as you are. We have some golden TLDR EU pin badges from back in the day when we used to make the pin badges. Long-time viewers
Is this
know.
our strategic pin badge reserve?
It is.
And
But
how
we're
do you say
selling it
pin
off.
badges in Hungarian, in Maltese, Ben?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that. Why did you remind me?
Fathalgismin, konaquasi acta investiti filbe pin badges mil abbariet.
But we have these pin badges that we've had for a while, which means they're exclusive and rare.
Yeah.
And we're not selling them. They're never going to be for sale, but you can get one if you subscribe to Too Long now. So if you subscribe to a physical edition of Too Long, go to the website, subscribe, use the code 1million. That's the word 1, the word million, all combined. It'll be on screen. Use the code 1million, and then we will add one of these special golden pin badges to your order. Now, these are very limited, and at some point we will turn off the code when we run out of them. So if the code doesn't work for you, it's because they've all sold out. Sorry. But for a limited time, if you subscribe to Too Long, not only do we immediately ship it to you, immediately-ish, but you also get a unique special golden pin badge to celebrate the millionth subscriber on TLDR EU. So if that sounds good to you, if you've been thinking about getting a magazine and this might push you over the edge, use code 1million to celebrate, to get a unique little piece of history, and to grab a golden pin badge.
So fun.
Existing subscribers, if you email the email address on screen, there is a way for you to also get a pin badge, but email the address on screen if you're interested. Cool. Let's move to the audience suggestion. Okay, so the audience suggestion this week is Anthony Albanese. I'm going to start with Ben as our up-and-coming Australia correspondent.
Yeah.
What's been going
Good
on?
day.
Is he winning or losing, as they say?
As they say. He's winning. He really is winning. So before the election was called, he was So it's important to note that Australia uses a two-party preferential vote. So there are sort of two different polls you can look at. So there's the first round votes and the two-party preference. The Labour Party, which Albanese heads and are currently in government, were not doing that well before the election was called. It looked like Peter Dutton, the leader of the coalition, the opposition sort of grouping, was going to win. Since the election's been called, and to be fair, for just a little bit before as well, the polls were starting to turn and Labour on the uptick. Now, as of sort of within the last week, Labour are 2 points behind in the first preference and almost 10 points ahead on the two-party runoff. So it's looking, like he is going to end up winning the election. There's a few different reasons for this. Firstly, there was the first leaders debate last week, and Albanese ended up winning that. And I think part of the reason that he won that and the reason he's doing so well at the minute is, again, what Georgina was talking about earlier, just the Trump effect. He is quite boring, but he... I think voters are turning to the government and sort of rallying around him. Also, Albanese is really trying to paint Dutton as a sort of, maybe not Trump supporter, but trying to sort of copy some of Trump's policies. So Dutton had previously called for like a referendum on deporting those with like dual nationality, being able to deport those with dual nationalities in Australia.
Wow.
And there's a few other sort of Trump adjacent policies that Dutton had called for.
He wants to ban working from home.
Yeah, he wanted to ban, and he's started to do a U-turn
very
on that
unpopular.
actually as well. Yeah. So this is the thing, is that that might have worked for Dutton a few months ago, but just because of the obviously the tariffs and the way that is impacting the world, but also in this instance Australia, people are sort of not that in tune with that kind of politics anymore, and they're starting to rally behind Albanese. But it's just sort of incredible that he's managed to turn this around at this point, and we've seen that polling change. Yeah. Again, they're still ever so slightly behind on the first preference, but on the second, on the when it gets the two-party runoff and it gets to just the two of them, well, it's technically, I suppose, not a runoff. It's the you eliminate people and reorganize votes. But when you go head to head just between the Labour and the coalition, the fact that they're almost 10 points ahead at this point is very impressive.
That's a real swing.
Yeah.
Georgina, do you agree with that?
I do agree. I think the polling, I mean, you can't say the polling is clear because it's not yet election time, but as much as you can judge a politician's performance by how well their party's doing, and the fact that Labour are coming through is good for him. I think also something that has, when we think about Australia from like the international perspective, because we don't get a lot of news through from the domestic media there, but something that really has reached the West is, or the rest of the West, is the social media ban that Albanese's government have passed and is coming into force later this year, which has been described as world leading because it is, and I think eyes will be on Australia when it comes into force, but also Western governments and the Western media more generally is also starting to talk more about this. Like I kind of mentioned before, the impact that big tech is having on all of our lives, the amount of time people are spending on their devices, the fact that Adolescence, the TV show, went as viral as it did. People are clearly seeing the risks to young children being kind of chronically online in a really unregulated fashion. And I think Albanese's government passing that, which had cross-party support, it wasn't a partisan thing, has kind of cut through to a lot of the Western media. And people are quite pro that. And also, it's also very popular in Australia. The last survey that was done on it in November 2024, 77% of the population were in favour of the ban, which was up from 61% in last August. So, be interesting to keep an eye on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, it's only 2 data points and they're not all that comparable, but this is a second instance of an incumbent, more liberal party seeing their polling turn around, at least to some extent. Obviously, Canada being the other example, following like the influence of Trump. Now, obviously, Canada, there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on, Trudeau leaving, and like that is a big part of it too. But it certainly is true that Trump and the Trump effect is shifting politics internationally. And as we've already said, the boring factor is coming into play. And it looks like, I think, boringness might win again. I think it might work. The thing is with Trump is it's just, I don't think he accounts for the fact that the obviously the protectionist stance that he has works well if you're trying to win over
Americans and or can work well if you're trying to win over Americans. But obviously that's just going to turn people in other countries away from you. And especially if they're having elections, the impact of that is that people who are aligned with Trump are just not going to win.
But I wonder if he cares. Like you say, does he think about it? I don't think he does. But I think even if you explain that to him, I don't think he's that bothered about.
I suppose that's true.
Dutton.
No.
Like Canada,
I agree,
maybe,
he probably doesn't care about
but
Dutton.
like,
Trump is tossing and turning at night.
I think, oh God.
Poor Peter, what have I done to him? Poor guy, man.
Okay, so that's Albanese moving up on the board. Where is he currently? Oh, there. He's moving up to the middle. So we'll see. The election is coming up. He might move up or down depending on like future results. He could get knocked off the board. We'll see. But right now, things are looking
predict
pretty
he'll be
good.
near the top of the board in a few weeks' time.
Okay. If you want to see us move a specific politician next week, obviously the audience gets to choose who we move in the audience segment. So comment your thoughts, let us know who you think should move, and then like the comments of other people who you support or you agree with. Let us know which one you want. And whichever comment has the most likes within reason, we will move them next week or add them. You're allowed to add people to the board, and it's been a while since we've had new people. I know we just did a purge, but if you think there's anyone worth adding, feel free.
Jack's going to be commenting Rachel Reeves this week.
I think add Rachel back. Rachel. That'd be actually great for her because she'd be reset and moved back towards the middle again.
Yeah, but she'd have like 4 weeks in a row of us moving
she would,
back
but
down.
She'd just be lightly negative rather than dead at the bottom on her own.
That's true.
Anyway, let's move to losers. It might be Rachel Reeves, who knows? And let's go for our losers of the week. Georgina, let's come back to you. Who is your loser of the week?
My loser this week, probably unsurprisingly, is US President Donald Trump. It's the second week we're moving him down, but I think that is very much justified. This is because of the spectacular fallout from Trump's global tariffs. If anyone was watching the stock markets last week, as we all love to do in our spare time, you would have seen how crazy the fluctuations were day by day. 10 percentage point drops on opening in a lot of cases. And also throughout the week, Trump, there was so many chaotic statements coming out of the White House, coming out of Trump's mouth, coming out of people, White House insiders, coming out of, someone saying, actually Trump's going to roll back his tariffs at one point, which he has done now. But at the time when they said that, it wasn't true. And then the markets shot up again. And then it was like, no, this is fake news, the White House said, and they dropped again. And throughout the week, it was just every minute, every hour, all the live blogs in the newspapers were struggling to keep us updated. All of us writing our videos were completely dumbfounded about what was going on. It was complete chaos. And this is not good. Obviously, it's not good because investors like stability. And as much as maybe in January when the dollar surged as Trump came into office and there was a bit of optimism about the US economy and maybe Trump's tariff policies, his protectionism would be good for the US, actually it's not turned out that way at all. And investors are now fleeing and looking towards other safe haven assets like the Swiss franc, which has surged, the Japanese yen, which has surged, the euro, which has surged. And just basically, regardless of what Trump thinks is going to happen with the economy, saying one thing and then U-turning on it a few hours later and then throwing something else out there and then taking it back. It's just not, no one likes that. It's not good. And it was an absolutely wild week last week. It's only going to get worse. And although Trump has now suspended tariffs on countries that are willing to negotiate a trade deal with the US for 90 days, this has also given himself and his team an enormous amount of work. If what he says is true, that 75 plus countries have come forward saying we want a trade deal with the US, his team they've now got to sort more than 75 trade deals in less than 3 months. And that is impossible because a trade deal, even between two nations, takes years to negotiate. So there might be a bit of respite while these negotiations are happening behind the scenes. But I mean, we better buckle up because the next 3 months, it's not going to be any smoother. Yeah,
it was a truly crazy week. And as you say, this is a pause. This isn't the end of this. And it'll be interesting to see how any of those trade deals develop because, as you say, doing that many trade deals simultaneously feels massively suboptimal. And it maybe would have made more sense to focus on the people he cares about most. And it'd be interesting if he does. Like, when we start to hear more about these talks and who he's speaking with and which deals are making progress, because as you say, getting even one trade deal done in 90 days is basically impossible. But we presumably will learn in 90 days time when the tariffs are meant to be reapplied. Maybe there'll be some countries he's like, well, we're doing good work with them, so they don't need to have theirs put back on. But it'll be interesting which countries get priority, which countries are engaging most. I bet we're going to get some tiny like nations that suddenly have a trade deal and they're the first one because they're just like, we don't want any tariffs. So like some random country is like the first one because obviously like the UK isn't going to sign like a rush trade deal or something. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see when this reopens as an issue, what it means and which countries are involved and what it looks like, because we're in a very different world economically than we were kind of a week or two ago.
It will be interesting to see whether Trump can successfully spin this as a political victory for himself within the US and within the Republican base. Because if in 3 months' time, Trump comes forward and says, look, me and my team, we've signed 60 trade deals in this time with all these countries. Look at me, I do loads of deals. I'm really great. Maybe that will play. Maybe people will buy it and it will work, even if, you know, they're small nations as you've suggested, which I also think is quite a good prediction in a way. Maybe people will say, oh, look at all the great things he's been doing. He's been getting on and doing stuff. And people, I don't know whether we do we say a lot that people have really short memories in politics?
Yeah, certainly.
Something
true.
we
I
think.
do.
Yeah. And it could be that in 3 months' time, people have just forgotten about the complete chaos and turmoil of the past week. And instead they think, oh, but look at all the great things Trump's done now.
Yeah, domestically, that will be really interesting.
I think one of the things that I'm interested to see as well on the back of these tariffs is exactly how he treats the UK, because there's been so much talk about Starmer's approach. And I mean, I think you can almost pinpoint the turning point for Starmer and the fact that he's starting to get positive coverage again after that Oval Office meeting. And he was treated as if he was like a returning hero on the way back from the States after the Oval Office meeting. And it was sort of seen as if he's done a good job at sucking up to Trump and we're going to reap all these rewards. And if we're being honest, we haven't actually seen any of these yet. There's been no trade deal. Sure, we got the lowest amount, but it was still 10%. We didn't get like some you know, it wasn't like a special treatment. There were a lot of countries that still got 10%. I know the EU got 20 and things like that. But not only that, but now we've got a 90-day suspension. So basically all countries have 10%. So even that's sort of gone. And there's questions about whether they'll actually be reimposed after 90 days if he does get these other trade deals signed. So we're still yet to actually see any of this. These positives that were sort of spoken of, and it'll be interesting to see whether they actually do come to fruition, or whether this was all sort of in vain, whether this sort of sucking up to Trump approach was actually kind of pointless and just a little bit humiliating.
There's going to be a lot of countries doing that, it seems, over the next few weeks. It'll be, as you say, did the UK get some kind of special deal or Starmer done particularly well, or will he be part of a pool of people who are sucking up to Trump at this point, trying to get things sorted? The thing you noted as well, Georgina, the kind of international markets response regarding currency is maybe the more worrying thing for the US more long term. The fact that not only is the stock market dropping, but also every other US based kind of asset that the currency is, bonds are, that like kind of across the board, it's not just a lack of faith in the market. It seems to be a lack of faith in America. And whether that will come back is probably more important. But domestically, you're right. He's got a shot.
I mean, it's, on the one hand, we say people have short memories in politics and maybe people will forget the turmoil of the past week in a few months' time and they'll just see what Trump is doing in terms of signing new deals. But I don't think that's always true. And people have been saying and were warning Trump last week, economists in particular, and also billionaire business people and bankers, that the impacts of his policy could stay for a long, long time, like for decades. And because I think, I don't know, in parts of Europe, I think there's been a wariness about the US's kind of place in the global order in the past and how much power the States has and how much self-importance we sometimes see or perceive from the States. And now we're seeing the culmination of this in Trump 2.0. And I think things that people have possibly in Europe thought about the US before are now actually coming to light. And it's the kind of thing of like, okay, well, if we maybe thought in the past that Americans were all just super pro-America and didn't care about anyone else. Like that is exactly what we're seeing now.
We're seeing evidence of it, certainly.
So yeah, definitely a really interesting phenomenon.
Sticking with Europe, Ben, who is your loser of the week?
Yeah, so my loser of the week is Zelensky. I think there's a few different reasons for this. And to be fair, a lot of them are sort of out of his control. I think, obviously, we've spoken a lot about tariffs. And I think that the changing dialogue and the fact that so many countries are now so focused on how they respond to these tariffs, their own domestic economies, how to deal with Trump. A lot of them, the focus has been taken significantly away from Ukraine, which has meant that this sort of momentum that was building towards a Ukraine peace deal has now sort of fizzled out. I mean, we saw at the weekend that Russia had done a missile strike on Sumy, and they'd killed 34 people, including 2 children, lots of people injured. It sort of struck a town square where people were going for Palm Sunday. Like, it was a really horrific attack. Very much seemed to be targeting civilians, and it was a really horrific event. And there's been so little spoken about this, and it's not really increased momentum at all for a Ukraine peace deal. In fact, responding to this, Trump had said that it seems like Russia had made a mistake, as if the missile strike was just sort of an error on Russia's part. And again, it's just an indication that Trump is trying to bolster his relationship with Putin, bolster his relationship with Russia. The relationship between the US and Ukraine has obviously been deteriorating for the last few months. And it just looks like the terms probably won't be as favorable to Ukraine as maybe previously suggested. I think all of this is just working significantly against Zelensky. And none of it really seems to be his fault. It's just international factors. So yeah, it just doesn't seem to be looking very good for Zelensky at all.
Could it be a reasonable interpretation, do you think, that maybe Trump's chaos, deliberate chaos last week is also either intended to, whether consciously or not, distract from his role in not securing a peace deal in Ukraine? Because that was one of the first things. Everyone expected, Trump had promised on day one that he would get a peace deal done. And for a while, it looked like the US was the one trying to get Russia and Ukraine together and sort it all out. And then clearly Putin and Russia were never going to agree to stuff. And then Trump has realized, oh, it's not going as well as I thought. Maybe I should do loads of crazy tariff stuff. Obviously, the tariffs were going to come at some point. But I think it's probably also a factor maybe in Trump trying to distract from his failings on getting a peace deal too.
I think it's an honourable thing to try and figure out why Trump does anything, but I don't know how worthwhile it is. I think obviously, whether intended or not, it has taken attention away from the fact that he's failed to secure a peace deal despite his insane promises of how quickly that was going to happen. I think you're right, it could have certainly factored into that decision making. But again, as Zac said last week, trying to untangle exactly why Trump put these tariffs on when he did and in the way that he did is just so difficult and possibly in vain. So yeah, I think it's a completely reasonable interpretation.
In a good way. Could it also be possible that if the tariff chaos is continuing and there's this pro-Russian pivot that we're seeing from the Trump administration, maybe that's another good thing for Europe as a whole, because they've now got not one major challenge in Ukraine security, but also economic security and that stuff. Maybe this will also help them refocus on European unity and Ukraine being a part of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the argument, hasn't it, for a little while now, that it will refocus Europe's efforts and bring a new unity. And I think we're starting to see that. I think that is probably true. I think that particularly the UK and how strong the UK has been in Ukraine's defence ever since the war started, pushing them towards a closer, especially defence relationship with the EU. I think that's certainly true. And obviously Starmer's stance on that. But yeah, I think even with all of that, I think it's still a really sort of negative, really sort of bad week for Zelensky.
What reaction have we seen from Europe so far in response to this? Obviously, as you say, been very much, there's been a lot of distraction and it's not been much sort of attention has been put towards it. But
yeah, I mean, to be honest, I haven't actually seen that much, which in itself, I suppose, isn't great. just so much of the attention has been on tariffs. It's hard to say, isn't it? Because the what you're trying to compare to is what you think Europe would have done were it not for tariffs, and that's just such a guessing game. And it's hard to say. But I think my instinct is we would have seen a lot more and stronger words and sort of more action against Russia in response to what happened at this weekend if people's focus were still on Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe one final thing to add on this is that despite Russia being one of, I think it was 2 massive big countries, the other being North Korea
And Belarus.
Belarus as well.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
That weren't hit by tariffs from Trump. A secondary consequence of Trump's global tariffs was a drop in oil prices. I'm becoming Zac. I can hear him coming back into my head.
Bond yields.
Yeah, gilt yields, oil prices. But, and Zac wrote that video on Russia's oil crisis last week, but a secondary consequence has been falling oil prices, which isn't good for Russia. Because if they are barely making profits, well, they'll still be making profit, but far less than they were. And their economy was already looking shaky. This is not going to help Putin's war either. No. And again, it just goes to show how Trump's crazy, completely irrational decision making is, there are so many secondary and tertiary and I don't know the word for 4, but
there are lots of consequences.
Further consequences that you just don't even think about at the time it's happening, but then you're starting to see.
Absolutely.
It's amazing.
Okay, let's move to the ultimate winner and ultimate loser of the week to find out who is the best and the worst. Okay, so we're going to decide on the ultimate winner and ultimate loser of the week now. The way this works is each of us will get to decide between the various people we've talked about in this episode, and if we reach a consensus and all of us say the same person is the biggest winner or the biggest loser, then they move again on the board, but we need a consensus. So, starting with the biggest winner, your options are Ursula von der Leyen, Keir Starmer, and Anthony Albanese. Ben, who have you gone for?
I've gone for Keir Starmer. I think it was just a huge week for him. I think it's been really good that he's managed to get his domestic sort of polling up. I think that's very good for him.
Yeah, sure. Georgina, who's your ultimate winner?
Not an agreement, I'm afraid. I've gone for Anthony Albanese, given the polling.
That's fair. Yeah, that's very reasonable.
I've gone for Ursula von der Leyen. So, do you remember a second ago when off camera I said this will be a very easy week to win because there's only 3 of us?
Yeah, but I think it was on camera, Jack.
Well, it wasn't intended to be in the video though.
I bet it will be.
It will be now. This is an easy week to move because you only want to get 3 rather than 4 people. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think giving her the credit does feel a bit generous, but I think Europe is a big winner this week. Yeah. More so than Starmer or Albanese. So I thought I'd give it to her. But never mind. She can stay where she is. Ultimate loser of the week. This one has to be easy. There's only 2 options. It's Trump or Zelensky. Who's the ultimate loser of the week?
Surely.
I think surely, but I thought surely about the last one too. Maybe we're just not aligned. Maybe we needed to some kind of cosmic link before we started this. Ben, who's your ultimate winner? Loser.
My ultimate loser is Volodymyr Zelensky.
Oh no!
I think
it's fair. It's fair enough. But
last week I would say that I think we're including a lot of stuff that had happened the week before last in the last week for Trump. A lot.
No, because he announced the tariffs, but they didn't come into force until last Wednesday.
They didn't.
He announced them on the 2nd, which was 2 weeks ago.
But the turmoil was on the Monday.
But the crash happened. But we hadn't yet recorded at that point last week.
I just think we'd encapsulated a lot of the tariff stuff last week, and I think we've put him down a lot as a result of that already.
Sure.
And I think that Zelensky's the refocus away from Zelensky has been quite significant over the weekend.
Sure. I think based on our reaction, we can reveal at the same time we both went Trump.
We did.
And then we need to justify really.
No.
He's had a bad time. I can understand yours too, Ben. I think both are valid, but
it's a shame.
It is a shame.
I mean, the fact that the White House literally came out on Tuesday or Wednesday last week and said that talk of a 90-day pause was, quote, fake news.
Yeah.
And Trump said, quote, no,
that was Monday
we're currently not considering that.
I don't think so, because the crash only happened on Monday.
It might be Monday or Tuesday.
Evening,
but then by Thursday, he'd U-turned. And then they were all saying, oh yeah, this is actually part of our strategy all along. Nah.
You're not having it?
I'm not.
I stand by Zelensky. I think
Well,
that's
it was an easy week for
real
someone to move
refocus.
twice, and nobody did. So,
Yeah.
sometimes that happens.
sometimes.
Will it happen again next week? Find out next week. Tune back into the World Leaderboard, and we'll... tune in next week. Scarlett,
Go on, do the
absolutely
sign-off
corpsing in
noise.
the corner. Join us again next week for more World Leaderboard. We'll be moving more people, and maybe some people will move twice if we finally agree on something. Also, make sure to submit your suggestions for the people you want to see move in the audience section, and make sure to get Rachel Reeves back on the board. We'll see you then.